What if the trade routes that shaped our world for millennia were not merely paths etched into the earth by human footsteps, but instead followed natural corridors designed by the planet itself? In the summer of 2023, an international team of archaeologists, geologists, and historians embarked on what many considered a fool's errand, to prove that the most significant ancient trade routes, from the Silk Road to the maritime spice routes of Southeast Asia, followed pathways determined by Earth's fundamental geological features. Their findings are poised to revolutionize our understanding of how civilizations connected, suggesting that human history's greatest commercial achievements were guided by the invisible hand of planetary design. The Eurasian landmass, circa 200 BCE. The Han dynasty of China had recently consolidated power under Emperor Wu, whose reign from 141 to 87 BCE would transform China into a dominant force in East Asia. Meanwhile, to the west, the Roman Republic was expanding its influence across the Mediterranean, having defeated Carthage in the Punic Wars. Between these emerging superpowers lay thousands of miles of mountain ranges, deserts, steppes, and forests, seemingly impenetrable barriers to consistent contact. Yet contact did occur. By 130 BCE, Chinese envoy Zhongqian had returned from his mission to the western regions, bringing back reports of prosperous kingdoms and exotic goods. This diplomatic mission laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the most famous trade network in history, the Silk Road. Dr. Oliver Westfield, leading archaeologist at Cambridge University and specialist in ancient trade networks, has spent the past decade examining satellite imagery, geological surveys, and archaeological findings to map the precise routes used by ancient merchants. His revolutionary hypothesis, that traders did not forge these routes through trial and error, but instead discovered naturally occurring pathways dictated by geological features, is now supported by compelling evidence. What we are finding is extraordinary, Dr. Westfield explained during a recent presentation at the International Archaeological Congress. These ancient routes almost perfectly follow what geologists call the least resistance pathways, natural corridors where mountain passes are lowest, water sources most reliable, and terrain most traversable. These pathways were not created by humans, they were discovered by them. The evidence spans continents. In Central Asia, the primary Silk Road routes follow precisely the natural corridors between mountain ranges. The path through the Fergana Valley, connecting China to Samarkand and points west, utilizes the only feasible low-elevation passage through the formidable Tuen Shan and Pamir mountain ranges. This is not coincidence, but geological necessity. Similarly, the maritime routes that connected East Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia, often called the Maritime Silk Road, followed ocean currents and monsoon wind patterns that made long-distance sea travel possible during specific seasons. The annual monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, reversing direction predictably, created a natural highway for ships sailing between continents. Ancient mariners from different cultures independently discovered the same routes because they were following the same natural phenomena, noted Dr. Westfield. A merchant ship leaving the port of Berenice on Egypt's Red Sea coast in 50 CE would ride the northeast monsoon winds toward India during winter months, then return on the southwest monsoon during summer. These discoveries illuminate the remarkable achievements of ancient navigators like those of the maritime kingdoms of Southeast Asia. During the 7th to 13th centuries CE, the Srivijaya Empire centered on Sumatra controlled the vital Strait of Malacca, the narrow passage between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra. This strait represents another natural pathway, the most efficient route between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Dr. Eleanor Blackwell, maritime archaeologist specializing in Indian Ocean trade, has documented how the prosperity of ports like Palembang, the Srivijaya capital, was directly tied to their position along these natural pathways. The rulers of Srivijaya did not create the strait or the monsoon winds, Dr. Blackwell pointed out, but they recognized the immense value of controlling a choke point on a natural trade corridor. Their empire flourished for centuries because they understood and leveraged geography. The new research also reveals how these natural pathways influenced the rise and fall of empires. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, 550 to 330 BCE, which at its height under Darius I stretched from the Indus Valley to Egypt and the Aegean Sea, succeeded in part because it controlled the natural corridors connecting 3 continents. The Royal Road, constructed by Darius around 500 BCE, running from Susa to Sardis, followed the contours of mountain passes and river valleys that represented the path of least resistance across Anatolia. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire between 334 to 323 BCE, he followed these same natural corridors in reverse, moving from west to east. His campaigns were successful not just because of military prowess, but because he navigated the same geological highways that had facilitated Persian control. The research team's most surprising finding relates to the collapse of certain trade networks. The disruption of the Western Silk Road routes in the 15th century CE has traditionally been attributed to geopolitical factors like the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire in 1453 or the development of maritime routes around Africa. However, geological evidence suggests another factor: climate change during the Little Ice Age, approximately 1300 to 1850 CE, altered the viability of certain mountain passes and water sources along key Central Asian routes. When we examine ice core samples and lake sediments from this period, explained Dr. Westfield, we see evidence of increased precipitation in some areas and severe drought in others. These changes made certain natural corridors impassable during times when they had previously been reliable trade routes. Nature gave, and nature took away. This perspective offers a profound reconsideration of human agency in history. Rather than seeing trade routes as human creations, we might better understand them as human discoveries of pre-existing natural pathways. The merchants who traversed the Taklamakan Desert, the navigators who crossed the Indian Ocean, and the camel caravans that traversed the Arabian Peninsula were all following invisible highways written into the land and sea by geological processes. The implications for modern trade infrastructure are equally significant. Dr. Westfield noted that many modern transportation corridors, from the Panama Canal to the major shipping lanes of today, follow these same natural pathways. Even in an age of advanced engineering, the path of least resistance remains compelling. The difference is that today, we modify these natural corridors with massive engineering projects, Dr. Westfield said. The ancient traders had to adapt to the corridors as they found them. This research also sheds light on why certain civilizations emerged as trading powers. The Phoenicians, whose maritime trading network dominated the Mediterranean from approximately 1500 to 300 BCE, did not build superior ships by chance. Their homeland along the Levantine coast provided both the cedar forests necessary for shipbuilding and natural harbors that facilitated maritime trade. Moreover, their strategic location placed them at the intersection of natural land routes from Mesopotamia and Egypt with sea routes of the Mediterranean. The Phoenician city-states of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos prospered by recognizing and utilizing these natural advantages. By 900 BCE, they had established trading colonies throughout the Mediterranean, including Carthage, founded 814 BCE, which would later challenge Rome for dominance. The Phoenicians became history's first great maritime traders not just because they were innovative shipbuilders, but because geography gave them advantages they were clever enough to exploit, explained Dr. Blackwell. Their purple dye industry, derived from local murex shellfish, became so renowned that Satyrian purples was associated with royalty throughout the ancient world. But that industry was only possible because of their specific coastal location with access to both the resource and the trade routes. This pattern repeats across history. Venice rose to prominence after 697 CE not simply through political maneuvering but because its lagoon location provided both protection and access to maritime routes connecting Europe to the eastern Mediterranean. The Venetian Republic's strategic control of these natural pathways allowed it to dominate Mediterranean trade for centuries, serving as intermediary between Europe and the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. Similarly, the rise of the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan, 1162 to 1227 CE, and his successors created what historians call the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative stability across Eurasia that facilitated trade along the Silk Road's natural corridors. The Mongols did not create these pathways, but their control of them from China to Eastern Europe allowed for unprecedented commercial and cultural exchange. The legacy of these natural trade corridors extends beyond commerce. Cultural diffusion followed these same paths, spreading religions, technologies, and ideas. Buddhism traveled from India to China along the Silk Road during the 1st century CE. Paper, invented in China around 105 CE, reached the Islamic world by the 8th century and Europe by the 12th century, following these natural pathways. The spread of Islam from Arabia across Central Asia and into Southeast Asia similarly followed these corridors. When we map the spread of cultural innovations against these natural pathways, the correlation is striking, Dr. Westfield observed. Ideas spread most efficiently along the same routes that goods traveled, because both followed the path of least resistance. Perhaps most relevantly for our modern world, the research illuminates why certain locations continue to hold strategic importance. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil passes today, has been a critical choke point since the ancient Dilmun civilization of Bahrain controlled Persian Gulf trade in the 3rd millennium BCE. The South China Sea, contested by multiple nations today, has been a vital maritime crossroads since the Han Dynasty established trade routes through it 2,000 years ago. These natural corridors represent what geopolitical strategists might call permanent interests on the global stage. While technologies and political systems change, the significance of controlling these pathways remains constant across millennia. For modern leaders and strategists, the lesson is profound: geography still matters. Despite technological advances that seem to shrink our world, the natural pathways that guided ancient merchants continue to shape global commerce and geopolitics. The recent blockage of the Suez Canal by the container ship Ever Given in March 2021, which disrupted global supply chains for weeks, demonstrated how dependent we remain on these natural corridors. What we are witnessing is not just an archaeological discovery but a fundamental reframing of how we understand human history, Dr. Blackwell concluded. Trade routes were not simply human creations, they were human recognitions of pathways embedded in the very structure of our planet. The most successful civilizations were those that best understood and utilized these natural advantages. As the research team continues to map these ancient corridors with increasingly sophisticated technologies, including ground-penetrating radar and advanced satellite imaging, they expect to identify previously unknown branches of major trade routes and better understand why certain urban centers rose and fell. The lessons for our present are clear. In an age of climate change, understanding how alterations in natural systems affect these corridors becomes crucial for anticipating disruptions to global trade. Just as shifting climate patterns affected Central Asian trade routes during the Little Ice Age, today's changing climate may alter the viability of modern shipping lanes, particularly in the Arctic, where melting ice is opening new potential corridors. Moreover, as nations compete for influence in the 21st century, control of these natural pathways, from maritime choke points to terrestrial corridors, remains as strategically vital as it was when Persian kings, Chinese emperors, and Venetian doges sought to secure them. The merchants who first ventured along the Silk Road during the Han Dynasty, the Arab sailors who mastered the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, and the Phoenician traders who circumnavigated Africa in the service of Egyptian pharaoh Necho II around 600 BCE were all following pathways that nature had prepared. Their discoveries were not acts of creation but of recognition, seeing the patterns written into the earth itself and following where they led. In this light, human history appears less as a story of conquest over nature and more as one of partnership with it, finding prosperity not by defying natural systems but by understanding and working within them. Perhaps this is the most valuable lesson these ancient trade routes offer us today: success comes not to those who fight against the grain of the natural world, but to those who learn to read and follow its contours.